Steelrising is a brand new Souls-like action RPG that officially releases on September 8th for new-gen PlayStation, Xbox, and also PC. The standard edition is currently running at a price tag of $49.99, so not exactly cheap, so hopefully this review will be able to help a few of you in your decision. Many of you will be watching this video a day before the official release, but I did get early access to the full game, so this will be a full game PC review. I've put around 27 hours into this game, 6 of that was playing the beta, and my full run took me around 21 hours-ish. I think I probably could have put 30 plus into it if I did all of the side content and grinded up my character a bit more. And those of you that may struggle with Souls-like games, I can see it easily being a 40+ hour experience. There will be chapter markers below for those of you that would like to skip around to different parts of the review, but if you do end up deciding to purchase this game on PC, I do have a GOG affiliate link below that will bring you a 5% discount, and that discount should last until the 17th of September. I appreciate those of you that use that link. Let's jump right in. Steelrising starts you right off with a few cutscenes to help set up the foundation of this alternate timeline sci-fi historical fiction game, I guess you could say. This game takes place in the late 1700s during the French Revolution, and one of the coolest parts of the story are the references to real historical characters and events. You're literally playing out an alternate timeline of the French Revolution, robotic style, and despite it being a game about automatons basically killing everyone, the game still has plenty of historical references, and that goes for the characters that you'll meet, some of the in-game events, and of course several of the in-game locations that you'll be visiting. Those of you that know your French history will recognize most of the NPCs in this game, and the further that you progress in the story, the more you will ultimately meet. To do this in a non-spoiler way, I'll just mention a few from the beginning of the game, and pardon my French. We of course have King Louis XVI, who was the King of France during the French Revolution, the Queen Marie Antoinette, her best friend Gabrielle of Polignac, or the Duchess of Polignac, Jean-Baptiste Clary, who was the personal valet to the king, and another very notable figure in the game is the French inventor Jacques de Vaucanson. In Steelrising, King Louis XVI has taken to his own way for dealing with the French Revolution, and you learn right away that he has apparently set automatons out to put this rebellion down and kill almost everyone that opposes him. Now obviously it didn't happen like that, but it still all lines up with what was going on at that time. In Steelrising, the inventor and creator of these automatons is of course Vaucanson himself, and in real French history, Vaucanson is known for being one of the greatest creators of automata and mechanical innovation. Now the queen has been locked in her room in Versailles, and she's not particularly happy with the events that are transpiring. You, the player, will serve as the queen's unique automaton bodyguard, and she sends you out to Paris to investigate what's going on to hopefully find a way to put an end to it. After experiencing the story in its entirety, I gotta say that this is one of the stronger points of the game, and I think many of you that enjoy historical type stories and also a bit of sci-fi elements will greatly enjoy this one. Throughout your journey, you'll also get dragged into all sorts of political conspiracy. You'll learn more about Aegis, which is the name of the automaton that you're playing as. You get a little bit on her background, and it does get quite interesting. And you'll also experience several flashbacks of events. There's plenty of cutscenes throughout the game. It's not just in the beginning, and by the ending scene, I really felt like I had played Dark Souls and also watched a movie, which was pretty nice for this game. Don't expect a ton of permutations in terms of how the story can play out, but there were a few parts where I was presented with an important decision to make, and the choices that I made did show evidence of having affected the story later on in the game. I'd have to play another playthrough to really test this out, but even with that said, overall the game still feels more like a linear story. There are optional side quests, and the ones that I did, there were some pretty interesting ones, while other ones felt a bit more like fetch quests, and it started to get a little old as I ran through the same level to go get something for someone. You guys will probably notice that feeling at some point. I should also point out though that some of the side quests did allow for new areas to be opened up in previously explored districts, so I encourage people to at least give a few of them a go. I also want to mention that after you finish the game, you can't go back into the world with your leveled up character. You have to start a new one. It was definitely a bit of a bummer because I thought I would be able to do that, even though the game kind of warns you that there's no turning back when you hit certain parts of the timeline. But it would have been nice to have open access to the world, of course, separated from what events took place in the main story. Now, the main negative aspect of the story comes down to how it was visually presented, and most of you have probably already noticed the facial animations are pretty atrocious. The company that's behind this game is a AA studio called Spiders, and they've actually been around for a decent amount of time. Their most notable game is their recent RPG called Greedfall, so you think they would be able to do a little better in this department now. I mean, it gets really weird and ugly at certain points, and there's also a few janky scenes. With that said though, after you get over the initial shock, the music in the game is great. The voice acting is good, and the story itself was really interesting. Moving on to the gameplay. The character creator doesn't really offer much. Everyone will be playing as the Queen's bodyguard, Aegis. You got a few hairstyles to choose from, different armor starting colors, and you can change the color of her metallic skin. Considering that Aegis is not a historical figure, I think they could have done much more here in terms of character customization, but it's not really the end of the world for myself. I did use a PS5 controller on PC, as I'm someone that feels like Souls games are easier with the joysticks. I didn't have any problems in this regard. I tried mouse and keyboard for about 10 minutes or so to review it for you guys, and it felt fine. I guess that's my initial impressions of it, although I would imagine that most people would still prefer controller for these types of games. You do have the option to change your keybinds on both keyboard and mouse and controller, which is a nice thing that Spiders included. However, I didn't personally change anything. Going back a few steps, before you start your new game, there's actually a way to make the game easier, as Spiders has offered a mode called Assist Mode where you can change a few things that impact your character, such as damage reduction. But before you switch that on, let's talk about this game's overall difficulty. In my humble opinion, this is nowhere near being as difficult as any of the From Software games that I've played, and I've played most of them. If you played Elden Ring and beat the first major boss, Margit, then you'll absolutely be able to beat Steelrising on the default mode. And even if you didn't, with a little bit of patience and a little dedication, I think you can do it. Some of the basic enemies can be quite difficult, especially on your first encounter, but there's not even one boss in this game that I personally died to more than 3 or 4 times, I want to say. Most of them I killed on my first or second attempt, which doesn't happen much for me in a Souls game. Is this game easy though? Relative to Bloodborne, Dark Souls, or even Elden Ring, I would say kinda. But in general, I would say no, as you can't just close your eyes and play. You have to be focused, and if you don't take the time to learn some of the enemy animations, you will absolutely get wrecked. I personally value challenge in games, especially in Souls-like games, and the game did challenge me enough to where I was engaged with it all the way to the end. Before moving on from difficulty though, I do want to point out that there are a few things that you'll discover that you can do that make the game a lot easier. Grenades are insanely overpowered, like insanely overpowered. If you just save up and buy a bunch of grenades for every single boss fight, you will win on the first try every time. And I really hope that they kind of nerf this a little bit. I think they need to be a little bit less strong, or perhaps you shouldn't be able to carry as many as you can right now. And there's also things like heavy attacks that you'll find that will stagger enemies, and you can continually just keep doing those types of attacks. So I think there's a little bit of design flaw in a few areas, but I tried to avoid doing that stuff to enjoy the game much better. Now, I did say that the controller felt good for this game, but the feel of the gameplay overall does take a little while to get used to. You're playing as an automaton, and it's clear that Spiders wanted to emulate that mechanical feeling a little bit. But in my opinion, it might be just a little bit too wacky. Sometimes it feels a little clunky and janky at times, and as you can see, when you're running around without sprinting, it looks like Aegis is sprinting in slow motion. And then when you turn left and right and sprint around, it can feel a little floaty, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. You don't really feel like you have as much control as you should over your character's movement. Enemies can also look a little janky at times, which I guess makes sense for automatons, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that it more so felt like lower quality versus it feeling like fighting cool robots. I do think there's going to be some people that just don't like the feel of this game, but I should also point out that once I got used to how it feels, it was still very playable in my opinion, and actually quite enjoyable and fun, which is what matters most. This is a good time to transition into game performance, And unfortunately, this was also not the best, but not the worst, at least on my PC. I have a 2070 Super and a Ryzen 9 3900X CPU, and I was getting around 50 to 70 FPS on the normal graphical settings, just kinda low for 2022, and sometimes I'm pretty sure I dipped into the 40s. The game was not playable for me in the ultra settings. It was very skippy, and at the high settings, it felt okay, but knowing that I was only getting 50 to 70 FPS on normal mode made me not want to even push the high graphical settings. But I should also point out that the normal graphical settings actually look really good, and they don't look that much different from high and ultra. What really baffled me though was that the first boss or mini boss that's in the tutorial area is where I dropped into the high 40s for FPS, and the boss itself was perhaps the most janky boss that I encountered in the game with its movement, which is not a really great way to start off in the game. After that boss though, and of course before it, the game was much better, but overall I would have loved to see more optimization measures taken for us PC players, especially as a $50 game. Perhaps they might have a few updates more ready for this for the September 8th version, but please watch more reviews if that's something that worries you, and of course if you're a console player, make sure to look for some console specific reviews. In terms of bugs, there really wasn't that many, so shout out to Spiders for that, and I'm sure that the official version that drops tomorrow will have also an update. Now, the bugs that I did encounter, once in a great while, some of the enemies would act a little funky and like walk away from me. There was one instance where I couldn't pick up a note on the ground, and a few instances where the camera would go behind the wall and it would look really crazy, but that only happened a couple times. And the biggest one was probably my dodge button failing to work on my controller, and I had to restart the game, and that happened maybe 3 or 4 times throughout my playthrough. Not sure, it might even just be a controller issue. The game and level design and the way that it plays is very, very Souls-like. You push through each level and attempt to reach checkpoints, which are called Vestals. And if you rest at a Vestal, your HP and one type of health potion is replenished. But all of the enemies, excluding the bosses that you've already killed, will respawn into the world. The enemy AI was pretty cool, and they had some neat ideas, although a little more variety would have certainly been nice. Towards the end of the game, I found myself running past many of the enemies because I just wasn't as interested in fighting that type of enemy again, and some of the bosses were definitely a little underwhelming, nothing like Elden Ring bosses. The Vestals are where you'll also upgrade Aegis and turn in your Anima Essence, which are basically your souls for you Dark Souls players. And do note that, like the Souls games, when you die, all of your Anima Essence that you have on your character will drop to the ground, and you must then retrieve it without dying or you'll lose it all. There's several different attributes to put your Anima Essence into, depending on what style of play that you want to go for. And as you do this, you will, of course, level up. I got to level 36 with my Aegis on my playthrough. I'm not sure what the cap is, but I'm pretty sure you can go much higher than that. There's also modules that you can unlock and upgrade that offer all sorts of mostly passive type benefits to Aegis. You can upgrade your main health potion, which is called Oil in this game, and you'll also be upgrading your weapons. There was enough to keep the character progression and development interesting throughout the entire game, and I enjoyed searching for some of the unique materials that are required to do certain types of upgrades. It certainly helped make the player exploration a little more meaningful. Now, a pretty big negative in this category is that I couldn't find a way to respec my character on my full playthrough in the beta or on my third character that I made to get some more footage. It's possible that it could be there, so make sure to look at other reviews, but I couldn't find it myself, and it was really frustrating because I didn't truly know what type of weapon that I wanted to use, and as you keep leveling up, it becomes harder and harder. It takes a longer amount of time to level up to the next level, and it took away a little bit of the fun of exploring new weapon types because I felt like the more I leveled up, the less likely I was going to be able to use other types of weapons. Just 1 or 2 respecs in the game would have been plenty and it would have made me happy, but I couldn't find it myself. I recommend those of you guys that are going to play this game to first level up endurance and maybe a little bit of your HP. Don't go all out in one of the weapon categories until you kind of have an idea what you want to do. The general gist of the game is spawn into the map. There's a series of gates around you, but you can only go in 1 or 2 directions to start, and eventually you'll unlock the other gates and they'll act as shortcuts for you to get places much quicker. There's a lot of verticality to the maps, but unfortunately this aspect of the game doesn't truly show its colors until maybe halfway through the game when you finally get access to better aerial movement techniques and a grapple hook. Those extra movement techniques, I think Spiders should have introduced way earlier in the game. At least on my playthrough, it took me many hours to get access to those because it does really enhance the gameplay quite a lot. The city map is beautiful, but unfortunately it's not very interactive. There's no mini-map, which in my opinion is good for a Souls-like game, and it's a semi-open world as you'll use a carriage to fast travel to different districts in the city. I think there were like 6 different major areas. If I could go back into my first character, I could give you guys specifics and examples, but I can't do that. And all of the areas offered a lot of gameplay, actually a lot more than I expected. You can go back to previous districts that you've explored, which gives it a little bit of that open world feeling, but the level design itself is a little bit more linear in nature when you're exploring them for the first time, as you can't just go any direction that you want. Now for armor in this game, you don't upgrade individual armor pieces. Instead, you'll be finding new armor sets as you explore, some of which are pretty cool, but to be honest, it wasn't really the highlight of the game for myself. I cared much more about the weapons. There's 9 different categories of weapons in this game. I was excited to show you all of the weapons that I picked up, but I beat the game, so once again, I can't show you guys that character anymore. Some examples are halberds, dual blades, claws, batons, fans, wheels, and chains. There's even muskets, but from what I could tell, you can't really use guns as your primary weapon because they do require something called alchemical capsules, which are limited in their use. I used the gun as my secondary weapon for specific situations, but I primarily used this really awesome fire chain, as you guys can see here in the video. Overall, the weapons were really cool. They felt really impactful, especially this fire chain. There was enough of a variety for me to find the ones that I really liked. For controls, you got a light attack, heavy attack, you can do combos, there's aerial attacks, sprinting attacks, and also each weapon has its own special attack. Some of the special attacks include ranged options for your melee weapon. Parries, shields, and AoE spins are some other examples. The game doesn't have magic, so to say, but it does have weapons that have those special attacks that give off alchemical effects, and you can focus your build on this type of gameplay if you so choose, and I did dip into that pretty heavily on my playthrough. If you use these alchemical effects the right way and you use them quick enough, they'll build up an enemy's affliction gauge, and when that gauge fills up, the enemy will either be frozen, set on fire, which deals damage over time, or they'll have electricity bolts just surging through their mechanical body parts, which allows you to deal more damage to them. With my fire chain, its special attack, as long as I have some alchemical capsules in my inventory, my character will jump up into the air and then smash down doing a fire AoE blast, and after that my chain will remain on fire for a limited amount of time. Once my chain is on fire, I want to attack the enemy as quick as I can to build up their fire gauge, which will eventually cause them to be set on fire, taking that damage over time. Now there's also 2 other gauges that correspond to the type of weapon that you're using, so if you're using power weapons like halberds or you're using agility weapons, if you attack quick enough, you can build up a certain gauge on that enemy, which will cause them to be stunned. So the game does reward aggressive gameplay. I should also point out the very important rapid cooling mechanic that allows you to regenerate stamina back after completely depleting it if you are somewhat quick with your timing when Aegis enters her rapid cooling phase. The bad timing will cause you to stall, and if you attempt to do this too many times too quickly, Aegis may freeze. Overall, I thought it was a really cool and fun combat weapon system, and ultimately a big plus for the game. And the last category that I'm going to talk about are the visuals of the game, and to me it was a mixture of really beautiful scenic areas and then also some more mundane areas that you explore off the beaten path. You'll go through a lot of courtyard gardens in this game, and over time they start looking very similar to one another, but then you'll randomly enter a new area of the city and see this beautiful 18th century Victorian France. It can definitely be very pleasing to the eyes. The visuals are a plus overall in my eyes, but I do think that Spiders could have spent some more time on a few of the areas, and of course they could have made the cutscenes better. To summarize this review, Steelrising was overall a positive experience that I do not regret. Its strengths are in its storytelling, combat system, and character progression mechanics. I would put visuals under strengths as well, as the game does have a very unique beauty to it, but visuals can also include animations, which were not always the best in this game, and visuals of course also affect PC performance, which certainly could have been a little bit better. If you like Souls games and you can get over a bit of jankiness, I think most of you will very much enjoy this game, but make sure to watch some gameplay closely to ensure that the general gameplay is right for you. If you don't like Souls-like games, you may want to still consider it, as I mentioned mentioned earlier that you can always play on assist mode, which may offer you a more relaxed, immersive experience where you can focus more on enjoying the story, or you can just buy a shit ton of grenades. I had a great time. It's not a perfect game, but I can tell that the devs at Spiders did put a lot of passion into this project. Is it worth $50? Well, if the game was better optimized and animations and cutscenes were cleaned up a bit, I would say yes in a heartbeat, but I would probably lean more towards $40 being the price for where the game is currently at. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, my GOG affiliate link to purchase Steelrising, which currently has a limited 5% discount tied to it, is below in the video description and pinned comment.